Okay, Boker Tov. Today's daf is Lamed Hey 35, and we are actually more or less caught up. We pick up, let's see if we can keep on track. We pick up at the bottom of Lamed Dal and Lamed Bet, and we are dealing with the source of how we know that women are exempt from mitzvah saseh shazman grama and obligated from mitzvah saseh that is not hazman grama. And as one of my students mentioned to me today, who was yesterday was doing the daf, he said it is so convoluted how we try to get it out, and there's just as many exceptions as there are things that fall in the rule. And the question about why do you use certain things as the paradigm and other things as the exception, and not vice versa, which is the question the Gemara has. And then the Gemara's answer, it's not like you're so overwhelmed by how persuasive the answer is, and he said, so this is really like they just knew this, and they were just going back and linking it to Psukim. So I said, you know what, that's exactly what Rambam says. So, and to remind us that Rambam actually says not just that the klal has exceptions, eliminating in a klalos, but the Rambam actually says against the simple sense of the Gemara. The Gemara seems to feel like this rule, mitzvah saseh shazman grama, will really dictate and will really tell us about things that we don't know what their status is. We just refer to the rule unless we have something to teach us an exception. Whereas Rambam at the end of the day says, we don't know any of this stuff from a rule. We just know really everything from Masorah in terms of which things women are obligated and which things women are exempt. So that deals, in general, we've shown, and when the drashot seem to be not straightforward, it's always a question. Did Chazal have a tradition about certain things, and they went back to find how it was based in the Psukim, or did they start by not knowing, and then they said, well, let's derive it? And the more convoluted the link to the Psukim is, and the more it's not at all clear what made you follow this path rather than another path, the more Rishonim say that sounds like they started with the tradition and they just went back to link it to the Psukim. So that's worth, I think, as a way of framing some of the issues we've been dealing with. Anyway,
did you make mention of, or do you think it's worth it? Rabbi Saul Berman wrote what had been a very well-known article many years ago on precisely.
But that's a larger issue about women's status. But yes, he does very much address the issue about the exemption of women's saseh shazman grama, and I think he deals with the Rambam as well. Actually, recently, a woman I think just came out with her doctoral dissertation was on the development of this in Chazal and the various midrashei halacha and so on, about this category of the mitzvahs that women are obligated and exempted, mitzvah saseh shazman grama. I think she discussed her paper out of a recent Jofa conference. So there is obviously some academic work on this. I don't remember her name. Anyway, let's just review where we are in the Gemara. The cases where we have a mitzvah saseh shazman grama. Okay, let's see how good people's memory is. They had to erase it because I had another class. Okay, the cases where women are patur that we have in the Psukim are tefillin. We, of course, mentioned the irony that this serves as the paradigm, even though, even though it's learned from Talmud Torah, and Talmud Torah is not in the same category. Okay, we have tefillin, we have re'iyah, right? Olat re'iyah, and what was the other one? How good does anybody remember? Tefillin and re'iyah. There was a third one, wasn't there?
Hakel.
Hakel is Chai. In the Chayav category, we have Hakel, and we have. Here I guess we have. Wait. Hakel. What do we have in the Chayav category? We have Hakel and Matzah. Okay.
And Dalit Kosot, no?
No, please, we're dealing with the right. Okay,
so. Sukkah the other one?
Yeah, so Sukkah was. Sukkah was the third set. Okay. So what we said was basically the question became, well, which one becomes the paradigm and which one becomes the exception? So the Gemara said, well, this is the rule, and this is the rule, and this is the exception. Well, why do you say that? Why don't you say the reverse? So it says, well, no, these are shnei ksuvim habayim ke'echad. Since, the basic principle is that if it was the rule, you would only need to say it once. If you say it twice, then it's obviously an exception because you're pointing out the exception. So the Gemara says, well, this also says it 2 or 3 times. Let these be the exceptions. So it says, no. Here, each one told you something. You needed each one. Each one. Because what? Well, sukkah, we need because you would have said, what do you call it? You would have said, teishu kein taduru, and you would have thought that that's dafka reason to be mechayev. So you needed to tell me that you're patur. Here it needed to say because you would have made a gzeira shavah to hakel. Here you would have told me, what would you have said by tefillin? Oh, you would have linked it to mezuzah. So each one of these, you would have had a reason to say chiyuv and had to point it out. So the pointing out doesn't mean that it's an exception. It was just to clarify that the rule is still in place. Whereas here, the Gemara says, you didn't need to tell me hakel. You could have just told me that the infants are chayiv and hakel, and I would have known that the women are chayiv, and you would not have, and I could have learned it out from matzah, and you wouldn't have had to tell me. So since hakel is extra, okay, this is superfluous. That means that these are the shnei ksuvim habayim ka'echad. That it's seen as that they're not necessary, they're not both necessary, and therefore this is the exception, and this is the rule. Okay, that's where we left off. So now we continue at the bottom of Lamed Daled Amud Bet. Gemara says like
you already
this.
crossed out Simcha on this list because there were 3 originally.
Oh, Simcha, right? Thank you. Simcha is also because that basically, well, the Gemara sort of said to some degree Simcha is Bala Mesamcha, so it's not even so relevant. Thank you. Okay, good. So now the Gemara says like this: Hanicha, we pick up like 8 lines from the bottom, last word on the line. Hanicha Lamanda Amar Ein Melamdin. That's good if you say that when you have 2 cases that are said explicitly, they're not the rule. Lamanda Amar Melamdin, but there's some that say that no, even if the Torah gives you 2 examples, it's the rule. Michael and Amar. What can you say? So, okay, we have only 2 examples here. Let that be the rule. The fact that there's 1 extra is not enough to say it's not the rule. So if you say that even when we have snakes of Mabayim Kech and Melamdin, you still haven't told me why the Chayiv category is the exception. Let the Chayiv category be the rule. That's question number 1. Question number 2, Mitzvah say Shelo Azman Grama Nashim Chayavos Minoah. That's all Shazman Grama. How about Shelo Azman Grama? Where do you know the opposite rule? Okay? How do you know the opposite rule? That Shelo Azman Grama, that women are chayav. Maybe women should be putter.
Everything?
Okay? Because there's also cases that fall in each category. Okay? How do you know that? The Yalif Mimo. So the Yalif Mimora. You learn it from Ishmo Vaviv Tirau, where it explicitly says where we learn out. Tirau in the plural means a man and a woman are chayiv in yiras avein. Mamor nashim chayavas. That's called mitazasei shlo azman grama nashim chayavas. Okay, so how do you know that they're chayiv? Because it says yira by avein. Okay, that's how we know they're chayiv. That's the rule. So the Gemara is going to say, okay, here, this is the rule here, and this is the rule, right? This is the rule that they're chayiv. Okay, so the Gemara is going to say, v'nevif mitalmud Torah. 1 minute, there are things that are lo azman grama that women are patur, like Talmud Torah. Let Talmud Torah be the rule. Okay, we say this is the rule and this is the exception. But how do you know? Let Talmud Torah be the rule. V'nevif mitalmud Torah. No, Talmud Torah pure riv. Same type of answer. You also have pure riv, ironically. Right, that's the one that women are actually having the babies. But based on the Gemara in Yevamos, we say that only men are obligated in Puravu. So we get back to the same rule. How do we know that this is the exception? Because there are 2 of them, and that makes it the exception. And this makes it the rule because there's only 1. Of course, we're going to see that's not going to be so easy to say. So let's keep on reading. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, top of Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. According to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, so he says that. It says Vayivarchu Tam Elokim, Vayom Elahem Elohim, Puravu. So he reads a pretty short read of the Psukim. Women are obligated in Puravu. So Puravu, Micah. So Puravu, God says in Puravu. So Michael and Amar. So you don't have 2. You only have 1. And if you only have 1, let this be the rule. So the Gemara says no. Mishum David Talmud Torah opinion a bench. Remember we learned earlier that women are exempt in Pidyon Haben?
Yes.
And that once the kid hits 30 days, that's a mitzvah without stop. It doesn't stop at night. It doesn't stop the whole life. So that's a mitzvah saseh shelo azman grama. So again, we have 2 cases. That makes it the exception.
But then we learned that out specifically from other Psukim, Peter Remain, that's why?
No, we learned it from the fact that it said, what was the pasuk? It says, tifdeh, tipadeh, mishiyesh lo b'pidyon, whatever, but not from, anyway.
Well, that's what I mean. You learn it from a specific
So what?
pasuk. So isn't that like an exception then? Because you learn, tifdeh, tipadeh, that doesn't...
Yeah, that's what we're saying. The fact that it said it means that there are exceptions. That's the point. That's shnei ksuma b'ayim kechad. That's exactly why it's not a rule. Because if it was a rule, you wouldn't have had to learn it from a pasuk. That's the logic of shnei ksuma b'ayim kechad. Okay, so the Gemara says, so therefore, shnei ksuma b'ayim kechad, v'chol shnei ksuma b'ayim kechad ein melamdin. Fine. Now the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. So we still have the question. We still haven't answered this, right? That if you say you need that 2 psukim, you can be melamed. why do you know which is the rule, which is the exception? But working still with the idea that once there's two psukim, it's the exception. We've also explained that here as well, there's the exception. So the Gemara says 1 minute. Rabbi Yochanan ben broken nami have a pure v'yavil mower shnei ksuma b'am kechad vein belamdin. The Gemara says 1 minute. According to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, pruervu moves to the other column, right? It's like right now in election season. If you're voting for somebody else, it actually switches 2 points of the lineup, right? So when pruervu moves to this column, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, this becomes now the exception. You also have 2 cases here. So why do you make this the exception? Make this the exception, okay? Tzrichi, no. There, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, you would say you needed both cases to be said explicitly, and if they're necessary to be said, they're not the exception. Because of if it had said Yirasav the aim, Haviamina the Chiv Shua Amar Rachmana, each darka lichvosh the lichabesh or lichvosh, right? The ain each a darka lichvosh or lichabesh. Anyway, yeah. So anyway, right? I know. So why is there no vav there? Anyway, whatever. Okay.
Otherwise, it means to pickle.
Okay, fine. That's a good point. Okay, so anyway, so the pasuk, meaning where do Chazal know? Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka makes such a powerful point that it says, Vayomer lahem Elohim pruervu, right? I mean, so how does the rabbis answer back? Why is it only the man's obligation? Because it says, right, pruervu, umilu es haaretz, umilu, right, et haaretz, v'chivshuha. So if it's supposed to be about sort of having dominion over the land, settling the land, dominion, etc., and this might even have a militaristic sense of, whatever, seizing and conquering, I guess is a good word. So anyway, so obviously it says that indicates that we're talking to the man, because that's the type of thing that's assumed to be like male behavior. So that indicates the pasuk is talking about the man.
That's what a Chashverosh says to Haman.
Right. So therefore, the reason it had to say explicitly, it's a little bit funny. The reason it had to say, I guess you would say, the reason it has to explicitly say that women are chayiv in pruervu, not that it had to say pruervu, it has to say pruervu because it's a mitzvah pruervu. But the women, it has to make it clear, vayomer lahem Elohim, to spell it out explicitly, was because you might have thought, like the rabbis, that v'chiv shua meant only men. So therefore, that was necessary to be said. And if it's necessary, it's not an exception. That's why pruervu was necessary to be said. Okay? Amar Rachmana, ish darka lichvosh, ve'en ish darka lichvosh. Lo, I would have thought that if it just said Mora, I would have said, I'm sorry, I think I kept that. I would have said that if it had just said Mora, I would have said that it's only Mora and not pruervu because of this darko lichvosh. I said it right. So therefore, it had to say explicitly pruervu that it's women as well, so I shouldn't make this mistake. The if it had just said women are obligated in pruervu, why can't I have learned out Yirasav the aim from that? The lokas of Mora, Haviamina, ish to see in. No, I would have said that this is maybe a special case that women should be exempt from Yirasav the aim. Why? Because men have a greater freedom of, in a marriage, greater sort of, they don't have a sense of greater sort of freedom of activity, and therefore they're obligated in Yirasav the aim. Isha the ain't sipik biyadalas. So a woman who does not have that same latitude, she has the primary responsibilities at home to her husband and to her kids. Well, maybe the Torah would have exempted her from Yirasav the aim. So, since there are times she's not able to do it, maybe she'd get a total exemption. Tzricha, it needs to say. So the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, having 2 here does not make this the exception, because each one is necessary. I shouldn't have limited pruervu to the man because of a chivshua. I shouldn't limit Yirasav the aim to the man because he has more freedom of activity. So it had to say it, and the fact that it was necessary to say it means that it's the rule and not the exception. Okay,
well, then it doesn't say anything then.
What?
Then there's no rule. There's no nothing.
Exactly.
If each of these are special exceptions.
They have independent reasons. So how can you cluster them?
As long as it's the other point. The fact that it's said presumes that it's going to be the rule. It only becomes the exception if we see that it having been said was superfluous. Okay, anytime anything is said once, we presume it's the rule. Unless we start realizing that the Torah is saying it more than necessary, and then we see it as an exception. So the fact that it says that a woman is chayav makes us infer that that's the rule. Don't say that this is repeated unnecessarily, because there's a reason to say it in all the cases. Whereas here, it's understood that the fact that it was unnecessary to say it in both places, right? If this were the rule, it wouldn't have had to be said both by Talmud Torah and Pidyon Ben. And the fact that it said it in both cases teaches us that it's not the rule, that it's the exception. Okay, so again, same point. Yes, there are a lot of things that fall into both categories, but we're arguing that here it's superfluous. Some of the cases are not necessary. It makes it the exception. Here, everything is necessary. It's the rule. And we say the same thing down here in the other cases. Okay, so now the Gemara continues. So where were you? Okay, now back to the question though. Fine, you basically gave the same answer for both. That there are cases in both columns, but some of them are superfluous, and if they're superfluous and they're two cases, we say that they're the exception and not the rule. But that's only if you say that two cases prove something is an exception. Snake suvim melamdim. Some people say snake suvim melamdim. Two cases can still be a rule. So the Gemara says, that's good if you say that you can't learn, that they're an exception once you have two cases and at least there's something that's superfluous. But if you say that even two cases, and even if it looks a little superfluous, it's still a rule. Michael Amemar, what can you say? And that goes on both the Azman Grama and the low Azman Grama. So what makes those cases exceptions and not rules? So Amar Rava, Papunai Yadila Lataima Dahamilsa. This Papunim, there was a place called Papona. Charlie will tell us where that is. Anyway,
described by Stanton.
All right, now, and anyway, they know the answer to this. Why? Who are the people from Papunai? Umaru Ravacha Bar Yaakov. Ravachi Bar Yaakov. So what does he say the meaning is? How do we know these rules, given all the questions we just asked? Amakra, Vayalacha la'ota yadecha lizikaron b'nei necha. L'man tiyeh Torat Hashem b'ficha. Huksha kol Torah kula l'tfilin. Okay, ma tfilin mitzvah seishas man grama nashim p'turot. Av kol mitzvah seishas man grama nashim p'turot. So you know what? You're right. There are too many exceptions, too many things mentioned in each category. If you were just looking at this list, you would have no idea which is the rule and which is the exception. Okay, at least we can concede that. Okay, there are things that fall in both categories, and both Zman Grama as well as Zman Grama. At the end of the day, it's not because, this has two and this doesn't have two or whatever. Fine, forget that. Anyway, even if it had to, probably you could maybe still make
You could argue it either way.
The argument still is, back to our friend Tefillin. Since it ends by saying, L'man tiyeh Torah Hashem b'ficha, it means that this is a paradigm for Kol Torah Kula. And therefore, since Tefillin is mitzvah aseh shazman grama and women are pater, and it links it to Torah, that pasuk is telling you that Tefillin is the paradigm. Okay,
so how do we know from the Torah that Tefillin is mitzvah aseh shazman grama?
How do we? Oh, that's from the link to Talmud Torah, where we exclude b'nechem v'lo b'notechem.
So it's
right?
totally circular.
But it's ironic because the Talmud Torah itself is b'nechem v'lo b'notechem, and that doesn't become the rule. That's not linked to Kol Torah Kula, and only Tefillin is linked to Kol Torah Kula. Anyway, so let's just read it. Ma Tefillin mitzvah shazman grama v'nashim p'turot. So it's not based on how many things are in each list. It's the fact that the Torah labels Tefillin as representative of Kol Torah Ketula. And now we say, and now we can just infer the converse. Since this is the rule, and the point is it should be the rule for Kol Torah Kula. So why did the Torah pick the rule of Kol Torah Kula as something that's a time-bound mitzvah to say women are exempt, right? Must be that we should infer that it's only the unique characteristics of Tefillin that make women exempt because it's time-bound. But something that wouldn't be in that category, women would be chayav. Okay, phew. That was made a lot easier than figuring out all these lists. Bottom line, Tefillin is the source. End of story. Now let's see. Can we end with that? Let's keep on going. So the Gemara says like, Hanicha l'man damar tefillin mitzvah say shazman grama. Shkoyach if mitzvah is a time-bound mitzvah. Okay, because if you say it's obligated at night and on Shabbos, and there are those opinions, so then what can you say? So then great, let it be the paradigm, and let it say that women are exempt from all mitzvahs to say. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara says no. Who is the one that says that tefillin apply both at night and on Shabbos, and it's not Zman Grama? Rabbi Meir. We know from another Gemara that that's Rabbi Meir. Okay. The Savra law, but we also know that Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that Shnei Ksubim Abayim Ke'echad, that once you have two psukim, they're the exception and not the rule. Because Shnei Ksubim Abayim Ke'echad ain't melamdin. So we go back, because in the end of the day, remember, what we said is we managed to say that, bottom line is, in the categories of exception have two cases and are seen as superfluous, both in this category, Shalom Azman Grama and Azman Grama, and therefore these become the exception. And the categories of Chiyuv, although they also have more than one case, all of those were necessary. But because these were superfluous, these become the exceptions. And the Gemara said, but there's only two in each column. And some people say, even with two cases, you can have it as the rule and not the exception. And that led us to say, okay, it's all about tefillin. What about those that say you can't learn that tefillin is lo azman grama? Fine, that's Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir says that two cases does label something as an exception. So basically we have two limudim. Either two cases labels it as an exception, and that's true here, and here they're not seen as extra, and therefore you don't apply the same principle. Or if you need more than two cases to label something as an exception, you can use tefillin as your paradigm for kol haTorah kula. And now the Gemara just ends this and says the following. One minute, but we got a problem. Because number one, Rabbi Yehuda says that two cases can be a rule, not an exception. Okay, and he says, lo azman grama. So what happens if you have neither path available to you? Rabbi Yehuda says tefillin is not time-bound, so that can't be the paradigm. And he also says two cases can be a rule, not an exception. So if tefillin can't be the paradigm, and if two cases can be a rule, what makes you pick one column over the other column? Back to the question. So the Gemara says, Mishum davi matzah v'simcha v'hakel shlosha ksubim abayim ke'echad v'shlosha ksubim abayim ke'echad ein melamdin. Because we would once again put simcha back on the list. We would not say what we said before, that simcha is basically the husband's obligation. Simcha is the wife's obligation. So we have three cases on the list. And if we have three cases on the list, that labels it as the exception. How about up here? Well, maybe if we would have purvu, we would also have three cases on this list. Okay? So there are basically now three ways to say, 2.5 ways to say how we know it. Either tefillin is the paradigm, end of story, tefillin is time-bound, or if tefillin is not time-bound and isn't the paradigm, then the point is, fine. But ironically, there are so many times the Torah explicitly labels things that go against the rule, both here and here, three cases that go against this rule, three cases that go against this rule, that labels these as the exceptions, okay? And because all the explicit cases that were against the rule, from there we know that the rule is the opposite, okay? Which is, of course, very ironic, okay? All right, anyway, moving on. We are now done with how we know mitzvah shazman grama, women are pater, and lo azman grama, women are chai. And now we get to the next part of the mitzvah. Right. How do you say men and women are chayiv, except for a handful like Tumas Kohanim and Baal Tashchis of the peyot and of the beard. Okay, so now let's move to that. If you to say women are exempt. Women are chayiv. Minani Mili, where do you know this from? Amar Rav Yud Amar Rav, v'chein Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, Amar Kra, Isha Isha Ki Yasumi Kol Chatos Adam. Okay, and that talks about bringing a korban when it's a certain case of Gezel Hager, but nevertheless the framing of it, Mikol Chatot Adam, all types of sins, and speaks about their liability towards it. So because it's used that generic frame, it shows that anything that's a sin, meaning not just an omitting of a positive mitzvah, but a transgression, is something that applies to Ish o Isha. All types of punishments and transgressions that are deserving of punishment applies equally to men and women.
I know that's a lot to say. I can do if I don't do the Pesach, that can be mitzvah to say.
Yes, it's a good point. Again, I think that the general sense is that a chait has to do with an action that is a transgression, not a lack of performing of an obligation. That's the assumption that's going here. Anyway, so now the Gemara says now we could have just ended there, but we normally have a whole little package of limudim that teaches me the scope of women, things that women are obligated in. Our mission just addressed the mitzvah lo taseh, but this following 10 lines of Gemara is appears in multiple different places in Shas, and it's just 3 different limudim to tell me all different things that women are chayiv in. So we're now going to go on, even though it's beyond the scope of our Mishnah. Okay, so it says like this. The Rabbi Eliezer Tana, from the house of Rabbi Eliezer, they taught, Amakra Asher Tasim Lifnehem. These are the mishpatim that you will place before them with an emphasis on mishpatim, like the civil laws. So hishvakazu and lifnehem is collective, all of them, right? So therefore, hishvakazu isha leish l'chol dinim shebetorah. So all matters of civil law, right, of sort of ben adam lechavero, of loaning and, property and damages and theft and all those types of issues, all matters of civil law. So all matters of criminal law apply equally to men and women. That's kol chatot adam. And all matters of civil law apply equally to men and women.
But there's nothing to do with me
Okay.
saying, right?
Right,
So
right.
separate.
No, right. This is just the question about, like, how do I know that if my ox scores you, I've got to pay? If it scores a woman's ox, it's got to pay. If a woman's ox scores me, how do I know those types of things? Okay, so the Beit Chizkiah Tana, from the Chizkiah they taught, Amakra, Vehemit Ish Odisha. Later in Mishpatim, it speaks about an ox that gores and kills a man or a woman and has to do a kofar, right? This sort of atonement payment. So why does it take Ish Odisha? He's because of Ish Ish L'chol Mitos Shebetorah. If a woman is a victim of murder or of a goring of an ox or whatever, then the punishment and is equally severe. It's treated as equal. Okay, so 3 different ways in which the Torah is saying women are in the same legal status as men. So now the Gemara says like this: it needed all 3 cases. If it had just talked about transgression, that women are punished for transgression. Mishum kapara chas rachman Allah. So maybe now, of course, it's a little ironic because it may be in order that the Torah said that women get punished for their transgression as much as men, because the sense is that punishment serves as an atonement for the transgression. Of course, the question is, but it's funny because the first thing you would have to teach me is first tell me that they are bound by those negative prohibitions, right? But anyway, so it's like, so I would say, well, that's only there because to give them kapara, right? I mean, the chiddush is before that they get kapara for being punished is that they're bound by the prohibition. But anyway, women, I just said that, I would have said maybe you can't infer from that women are equal in other places of the law, because maybe it's only in areas of transgression. I mean, we could flip it. Transgression is particularly weighty because it's transgression, and they get punished because to give them kapara for transgression. But you couldn't have inferred from that to give them necessarily equal standing when it came to civil law. All right. So where were we? When it came to civil law, ema ish debar maso matan in, maybe a man that normally is the one who does business. Maybe that's the guy that the Torah sort of applied all the laws of civil law to. Ishalo, and a woman not, which is ironic because just because she's not usually in that category doesn't mean that when she does find herself in that category, she should be disadvantaged or whatever. But no, maybe nevertheless, maybe that's a way of keeping her out of that category. You only want men to do business, and therefore these laws, I don't know. Anyway, so I might have thought that a woman does not have equal standing in civil law. If it had just told me a woman had equal standing in civil law, because it's necessary for a livelihood. As Rashi says, if you didn't have any standing in civil law, somebody could rob from her and steal from her and borrow money and not pay back and would be exempt. And she could do the same. She could rob and from somebody else and not be obligated. Mm-hmm. So basically, it would make her like a pariah in civil society. Okay, if she was not at equal treatment under the law. So it was necessary. Of a kofar, so now we have necessary 4 attempts of what do you call it, of like sins, because it's weighty, so she's bound by it, and she needs a form of atonement if she transgresses. We have the issue about business because it's necessary to be part of society, be bound by civil law. Of a kofar, but the idea that if an ox gores, it pays atonement. Ema, okay, this has got to be one of the most difficult lines that we're going to read. Ema ish bar mitzvos in. Maybe an ox only has to pay kofar when he gores a man, because a man is like obligated in mitzvos. Isha, more mitzvah. That's what Tosos asks. Yisrael says more mitzvahs. I mean, we just got through saying that women are obligated mitzvahs to say shalos man grashma. Anyway, Isha, but a woman who has less of a mitzvah obligation, well, maybe would not be.
Is that for real? That's like
that she's not considered a bar mitzvah.
No, but this is like rather arbitrary. Like, since when do we see that killing is because of the number of mitzvot? I mean,
I understand.
because it kills an Amma Aretz. He's fewer mitzvot. And,
Well, no, he's not bound by fewer mitzvot. That's not about his legal status. But this is obviously very difficult because, Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked once in the earlier ages of feminism, I don't remember, going back 40 years or 50 years, about a rabbi that said, women in my community are basically saying that the Torah recognizes, it sees them, as second-class citizens, sees that they don't have the same level, not just that they don't do as many mitzvot as men, but that at a fundamental way, their status, they're recognized.
This is a statement of their humanity.
Well, right. They're recognized as less kedusha, less of a status, and so on. And we make a bracha shalos on the isha and the whole thing. So he goes through this whole true and says, no, chas v'shalom, that's absolutely not true. Same level of kedusha, everything is the same. It's just technically there are reasons why they're patur and mitzvot, but that doesn't see them as fundamentally of a different status. Okay, but then you read like a Gemara like this, you could say it's only the Havamina. In the end, it rejects the Havamina, right? But it sort of says that maybe we should look from the exemption of mitzvot. That would have put them at some lower status, and therefore you're not as deserving as an atonement payment if they get killed by an ox. A very, very disturbing Gemara. Yeah.
Does this connect with the question of how much we're considering the wife as property? The discussion much earlier.
Yeah, but that was a sexual property. I think that was still less. We never got to the conversation sort of like as a slave of property, in that sort of sense. But
no, I mean an element.
Yeah, I mean maybe there's. I mean, maybe. There could be. Yeah.
I think the woman have more mitzvahs than the man.
Because what do you mean?
Because they're raising the children.
Right. In practice, that's of course right. That's of course the irony as well. I mean, that's of course the irony as well, which is like as a matter of, as a matter of like who really maintains the Jewish household, right? It's the women, right? Kashrus and Shabbos and raising the kids and all of that. But then as a matter of like social standing, right, the men are sort of seen in this, higher position. But that's an excellent point. Yeah. The Yashmin in Haas. Anyway, I would have had a Havamina. Baruch Hashem, that's not the halacha. The Yashmin in Havamina, Ibn Hashem. If you just told me that, that's what we're talking about, loss of life. So of course women are going to be treated equally. Chas Rachman Allah. So therefore the Torah had Rachmanas and said, life, she's deserving of obviously, or the heirs are deserving of a kofar payment. Hanach Tarki, other things which are not as severe as loss of life. Maybe women would not have equal treatment. Srichat needs it. So at the end of the day, women are treated as equal sort of, citizens in all these areas, civil law, criminal law, the whole thing. The only difference is time back, certain mitzvot aseh. Okay, and now we go with a small number of negative mitzvot of prohibitions that women are exempt from. Chutz with 3 exceptions. The Baltashkif, Baltashkis, cutting the payos and cutting the corners of the beard, and Tumas Kohanim. Okay, for a Kohen, male Kohanim cannot become Tamei L'meis. So the one says, Bishim about the Tamei L'meisim. I get it's obvious why the becoming Tamei L'meis does not apply to women. Say to the Kohanim, the sons of Aharon. So B'nai Aaron below B'nos Aaron, right? And it's not just like a pasuk that's exempting. We know that basically the male children are called Kohanim. You know what a female child of a Kohen is called? A bat Kohen. Actually, there is 1 or 2 Gemaras that actually refer to as a Kohenet. Okay, there's and actually some discussion about whether you can give a bat Kohen / Kohenet like the Matanot, like the Zrola Chayayim B'Keva, and certain things that are interesting. Anyway, but nevertheless, fundamentally, not really recognized as a Kohen. Only the males are Kohanim. So clearly that only applies to the males. Okay. Ela Baltaki for Baltashlis, but cutting the corners of the payout of the head, and the side locks and the beard, how do you know to exempt women? Right. And again, you might say, well, women don't have that. Well, first of all, women do have, could have some side.
They don't have the beards.
Yeah, they don't have the beards, but some women do have beards. I mean, whatever, and what about cutting somebody else's beard? Right. So how do you know that they are exempt from that? So the Gemara says,
"Isn't it say Piat Zikanecha?"
Yeah. So what? Zikanecha v'lo ziknotecha?
No, Zikanecha v'lo ziknotecherim. Right? It's yours.
Yeah, but you transgress when you cut other people. I mean, that's another discussion. But you do transgress when you cut somebody else's hair. So anyway, the Gemara says Minola, and where do you know that women are exempt? Tichsiv lo takivu ba'ad roshchem, lo tashchit eit ta'ad zikanecha. So kol sheyeshno ba'ashchata yeshno b'hakafa. Anybody that is prohibited against destroying the beard is prohibited to prohibited to cut off the side locks. So v'hani nashi hovlo isnu b'ashchasan, since women are not warned against cutting the corners of the beard, less nu b'akav, they're often not warned against the side locks. So now the Gemara says, how do you know? How do you know they're not warned against the beard? How do you know they're not? And Rashi says, let's say they happen to have facial hair and have a beard, or as I say, let's say it's for cutting somebody else's beard. Anyway, how do you know they're not included in the cutting of the beard? So the Gemara says, if you want svara, it's just svara. Clearly, okay, you can have some rare exception that maybe, a woman has a beard, but nevertheless, clearly the Torah is talking to men, right? That's the presumed audience here, So that's number one. The Ibai is saying, if you want, I can tell you, Kra, it's from the pasuk. Damar Kra lo sakivu be'at roshchem, lo sashchit eight be'at zikanecha. Thank you. Zikanecha would be your elders, right? Lo sashchit eight be'at zikanecha. Midashani Kra b'dibure. Since the pasuk went out of its way, why did it say roshchem and then say zikanecha? Why didn't it say ziknechem? Zikanchem. Excuse me, I just did it again. Okay, Zikanchem, I guess it would be. Why did it say Zikanecha, not Zikanchem? Midashani Krabit Ibure and made it the singular. Dimke Nichtav Rachmana Pa'at Zikanchem. My Zikanecha. Zikanecha, below Zikan Ishtecha. It's singular. Your beard, not your wife's beard, okay? So the singular means a smaller audience, okay? The bearded lady. So therefore, the beard is only by men that naturally have a beard, and therefore, if that's only by men, the whole pasuk is only by men as well as the pay.
That's very interesting. How do you know that Rosh Hashanah is not a different thing? Rosh Hashanah, men and women.
I know, so it's funny. The Rosh Hashanah is plural. You could say Dafkat's making it more broad, and we're choosing to link it to the end of the pasuk. What can I tell you? Again, it gets to the question of how much do we know this, or how much are we deriving it? So now the Gemara says like this: below, are you telling me that women are not prohibited about cutting the beard if they have a beard? Tanya, we talked about Brisa. Zakan Isha, the Hasaris, if a woman or a eunuch has a beard, also going to be unlikely for a eunuch to have facial hair. Shehelu Sear, if they have facial hair, that's like a beard for all purposes. So presumably all purposes mean for the halacha of cutting the beard. So at least that bright, that's not a question of the psukim we're learning it from. That's just a brighta that seems to go against our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says women are exempt, and this brighta says that if women have a beard, the beard has a full status of a beard.
So in addition to svara and mikra, there's now a masorah.
Right. But the point is, it's funny that it's being brought in as a challenge to the psukim we derive it from, because really it's just a different opinion than our Mishnah. So why don't you just say, okay, fine, that argues on our Mishnah. We're defending our Mishnah. But let's see what the Gemara does with it. So my lav lashchasa, doesn't that mean for this prohibition of cutting the hair of the beard? I'm going to buy it. No. Lashchata lo matisam. No. It can't be talking about hashchasa. Because our Mishnah is certainly right about hashchasa, that women are exempt from cutting the beard. How do you know? Besides the psukim we quoted before, Abai is going to give us another pasuk that teaches us that women are exempt from cutting the beard. The yalif pa'at mibnei Aaron. Now what you have to know is that the Torah says both by Yisrael, don't cut the payot and the beard, and by the Kohanim, right? By the Yisrael, the Torah says, what's the pasuk we just got? Lo takifu pa'at rashchem, lo sashchit et pa'at zikanecha. Okay? So that's Israel. By the Kohanim, it says, what does it say by the Kohanim? Rashichem, no, it says, what's the pasuk by the Kohanim? Lo yigalechu. Fa'at zikanam lo yigalechu. So that's the end of the pasuk. Fa'at zikanam lo yigalechu. What's the beginning of the pasuk? Anybody have the pasuk in there? Here. Thank you. So the pasuk is no, it's Vayikra 21.
21. Oh yeah,
Yeah, it's two psukim. So which one is it? Where is it?
21.
Here we go. No, it's just lo yikruchu charcham. There's no peyat haros. It's lo yikruchu charcha b'rosham. Okay, lo yikru, which we'll get back to. Lo yikruchu charcha b'rosham. Okay, so anyway, at least the pa'at zikanam is the same by both, except here it's lo tashchit and here it's lo yigalechu, and we'll look at that in a minute. But nevertheless, since this is talking about the Kohanim b'nei Aaron. The pasuk says, right? That's how the psukim begin over there in Emor. The Kohanim b'nei Aaron. We say since this is only men and this is the Kadam Lo Yigalechu, so the Pe'ah links us, right, and tells us that this is also only men, and if this is also only men, then the whole thing is only men. So it's another basis to tell us that that this is talking about men. First we said it's the Svara or Zekanecha tells you that. Now we're telling us the link to Kohen tells us it's only men. Okay, so we'll see in a minute what Abai does with this Breita that says a woman's beard is treated equally like a beard. But he starts by saying there's no question that women are exempt from this issue of shaving the beard. Okay, so he says like this. He says, He says like this. You cannot say that women are exempt from ashchasa, are chayiv in ashchasa. The yoli pas min bnei Aaron. You learn it from bnei Aaron. Malahola nashim p'turot, afkan nashim p'turot. The same way their women are exempt, your women are exempt. Now the Gemara interrupts Abaye to confuse it, okay, to get us a little bit confused. So get ready. So the Gemara says like this. It says, how do we know that women are exempt by the case of the Kohanim? Because the psukim started earlier than that, right? The psukim started with where's the psukim? I'm sorry. It says like this. It says, and more lakohanim b'nei Aaron, right? Lenefesh lo yitama be'amav. So way back here, way back 3 psukim was and more el hakohanim b'nei Aaron. That's the men, right? Lenefesh lo yitama be'amav, lo yitama be'amav. Kim li sheiro akarov elav, lo yitama ba'amav. And all of this was tuma, lo yitama, right? And it ended with lo yitama ba'al be'amav, lo yitama ba'al be'amav, lehechalo. Then it says lo yikrichu karcha v'rosham. So the question is, how do we know this is only males? Because way back here it said we're talking about the men by tuma. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to stop to question Abaye and says your idea that you can learn from Kohanim assumes that this label of men applies all the way over here. How do you know that's true? So let's take a look. So, so it says like this. So the Gemara says, one minute. If Bnei Aaron applies to the whole, everything, to the whole inyan, going all the way from Tuma to here, why did I need a Gzeira Shava? You, Abai, said that we make a Gzeira Shava. Forget a Gzeira Shava. I'll say this is all talking about men, and I'll apply this to Yisrael by a Kal V'chomer. What's the Kal V'chomer? And I'll say like this. I would say if Kohanim that have greater obligations, more demands than a normal Yisrael. When it comes to shaving the beard, it's only the sons, only the men. Yisrael, when it comes to shaving the beard for Yisrael, certainly it should only be only the men. So the big one is saying, why do you need a Gzeira Shava? Let's just learn it from a Kal V'chomer. So the Gemara says no. Ilav Gzeira Shava Havamina. So this is still Abaye's Gzeira Shava. If it wasn't for the Gzeira Shava, I would have said Hifsik Inyan. I would have said this is why says Abaye I need the Gzeira Shava, because I would have said Bnei Aaron doesn't apply. Bnei Aaron is only by Tuma. I would have said that maybe this is men and women. But then, okay, maybe this applies to women equally. But then I say, wait, but there's a Gzeira Shava. If this applied to women equally, why would I need the Gzeira Shava? What's the Gzeira Shava teaching me? So since the Gzeira Shava is telling me there's something to learn from Kohen to Yisrael, there's nothing. The only thing there would be to learn is to limit it to men. Okay, and therefore that teaches me that this is going on the whole thing. Okay, so it's saying like this: if I didn't have a Gzeira Shava, I would have said this is men and women. Okay, Hifsik ha'inyan, and I wouldn't have had a Kal V'chomer because I would have just said this limit of men doesn't go this far. Okay, but then comes along the Kal V'chomer, and the Kal V'chomer says, hey, you know what? There's something you can learn from one to the other. I'm saying, what can I learn? You know, this is men and women. That's men and women. There's nothing to learn. Oh, the fact that it's telling me there's something to learn teaches me that this all is about men. And therefore, then now I understand why there's a Gzeira Shava, to teach me that there's something to learn. Okay, so it's a very complicated Gemara, because at the end of the day, the Gemara isn't questioning the idea that you can learn from Kohen to Yisrael that it's only men.
No, it's
The Gemara is just saying, why did you need the Gzeira Shava? Because if I didn't have the Gzeira Shava, I would have said this applies equally to women, and whatever. The Gzeira Shava forces me to find something to learn, and that teaches me that the idea of men applies here as well.
It's a literary sidebar. It's really
Right.
about hermeneutic. It's a hermeneutic debate.
Exactly, which is, I think, sometimes hard to keep focus on. But let's finish the argument, okay? So the Gemara says like this. Hashtanami name hifsi kanyan. Gemara says, no, I disagree. If you would have said that that this men is only this part, and this is men and women, I could still learn something from the Gzeira Shava, even if this is men and women. What could I learn from the Gzeira Shava? The Gemara says, the Imishum Gzeira Shava, and you'll tell me, well, what's this? If it's about men and women, what's the Gzeira Shava teaching me? There's a lot to teach me to link the two. Like we taught in the Brisa. Lo yigalechu. Then now we're going to say, you know why you need the Gzeira Shava? Forget the men issue. You need the Gzeira Shava to tell me what is the nature, what type of act is forbidden. And here's what we're going to say. Tashchit means a destructive act, like it gets it at the root. But it doesn't mention shaving. It doesn't mention cutting. So tashchit could be something like, plucking it out with a tweezers. Because now, yigalechu is a cutting and a shaving with a blade. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't talk about getting it out at the root. So each one of those is only a piece of the puzzle. So let's take a look. Lo yigalechu, do not shave. So maybe you can't even cut with the scissors, because that's a form of blade and cutting. Talmud Lomar lo tashchit. No, tashchit tells me it has to be a destructive cutting. It has to be like a shaving against the skin. Cutting with scissors is a yigalechu, but it's not a bal tashchit. Oh, but if it's about destructive and getting at the root, maybe plucking it out with tweezers, no, lo tashchit isn't enough. It has to be with a blade. It has to be with shaving. So what is the only thing that's prohibited? This is very important. This is how we know, this is why many people think you can use an electric shaver, because they say an electric shaver is essentially a scissors action, right? Yeah. So therefore, it's only a shaving that cuts at the root. That's a razor blade. So you need a Gzeira Shava to tell me the fundamental definition of what type of shaving is forbidden on the beard. Not scissors, not plucking, only like a razor blade shaving. So back to the question, which is that how do you know, why is Rabbi using his Gzeira Shava to say men or whatever? Again, this is just really like a hermeneutic question. Why not just say that this applies straight and learn it out from like a Kal V'chomer? So the Gemara says no. If that was true, that the Gzeira Shava was not teaching me also the issue about men, it would have just said lo tashchit et zikanecha or et shebizikanecha. The fact that it had this extra word, it seemed to me that's the word pa'at, is coming to tell me use that extra word to learn out something else, to make a Gzeira Shava to teach me also this issue about not just the nature of Bat Tashchis and Yigalechu, but also the idea that it's only men. Anyway, that was pretty complicated, but the bottom line is, what Abai is saying is that I know Bat Tashchis is only men, because it's only men by Kohanim, and therefore either a Kal V'chomer or a Gzeira Shava, and a Gzeira Shava maybe teaches me other things as well. But bottom line is, I know this is men, and therefore I apply it to Yisrael, and therefore it's clear that women are not obligated in the shaving of the beard. So now we have to get back to the Breita that said the beard by women is treated as a beard. So let's just get back to that. So the Gemara says like this. The Alahadetanya, that's what we call in the Breita. Zakan ha'ishav hasaris shehelu seyar reihim to zakan l'chol d'vor vehem. It's considered like a full beard. So the Gemara says l'mayhil. So for what halacha? Aram Marzutra l'tumat negaim. To tell you that if it gets a spot of tzarat, like we just learned, that they're tamei. So the Gemara says tumas negaim behedek siv. It says in the pasuk, the ish o ishati yabo nega berosh o bezakan. It says zakan even in the pasuk talking about isha. So Elam Marzutra Litara Nagayim. No. To tell you that if the spot becomes actually that when they become tahor from this process of the tuma of the hair, of the beard or of the head, that they follow the same procedure as a man would be. So the Gemara says that's also obvious. 2 hours Negoim Nami Pshita. Even the Bas Tumahi, if she's going to be in the category of becoming Tamei, just like the man, Bas Tahari. So he follows the same process of Tahara. Itzrich. No, you need it. So meaning Itzrich, not Tahara. Back to Tuma. Why do you need this brighter to teach me that Negoim applies to the beard, even if it's in a pasuk? Meaning, I would have read the pasuk, and I probably would have read the pasuk this way. If I said to you, "Hey, Charlie," it says, is the Torah talking about a beard for a woman? So you would have said, no. It means if a man or woman has a tzarat in the head, or a man has a sad on his beard, right? You would have said zakan is referring to the case of man. You would have said it's not talking about the case of women.
We've seen this technical term.
Yeah. The pasuk is only talking about partially. It's on half of the pasuk. Isha isha bonega barosh. Period. That's isha isha goes on barosh. Oh, bizakan, or on a man's beard. So that's how I might have read the pasuk. Hadar asan leish. That beard goes to the man. Kamash Milan. So it teaches me not that way. It teaches me the Braita that it's considered the same for tzara, for even a tzarat on the beard. So rather than say that there's a Braita that argues on our Mishnah, and I don't know why the Gemara can't contemplate that there's another opinion that argues on the Mishnah, it says that everybody agrees a woman is exempt from Baal Tashchit by the beard and the peyot, and that the only issue is, and the Braita is talking about the halacha of tzarat on the beard, just to clarify what the pasuk means. How do you know a woman is exempt? Either zikanecha, not zikanchem, teaches you that, or it's svara, or the link to Kohanim teaches you that this is all talking about men and not women. Yes.
I just want to say, I think it's really this concept of hifsik inyana.
Yeah.
It's really interesting question. Where does the context of the text end?
Right.
How far can you extend and define the context? That's
Right.
Really
Right, and it gets carried even more to the pasuk we just dealt with, which is even in one pasuk
Right.
to limit it to half the pasuk, not the other. Right. Okay, let's just read a little bit more. Look at this. Aren't we impressed about how we're totally back on track? Okay, so the Gemara says like
We're
this.
saving it pretty thin.
Ooh. Yeah, okay. Isi Tani. So now Isi teaches Af Bal Yakarchu Nashim Pturot. Women are not only exempt in the shaving of the beard and of the side locks, but Lo Yikuku Karcha Berosham, making like a bald spot in the head. Women are exempt. My timer, okay. The Isi, the Darish Hachi, Banimatem Lashem Elokechem, Lo Titko to do, Lo Tasimu Karcha Beinenechem Lamet. Okay, so here's another pasuk you've got, right? By the Kohen, you have this Pa'atzakanam Lo Yigalechu that links to this pasuk by Yisrael, but it also says Lo Yikuku Karcha Barasham, Uvatzakanam Lo Yigalechu, and we might as well say Uviv Saram Lo Yisratu Sarate.
Right, Sarate.
Lo Yisratu Sarate. So from this link, we learn what is the nature about it's a tashkis and yigalechu. But these things, karcha birosham and saratet, we have another pasuk by Yisrael. What is the pasuk we have by Yisrael? Banim atem laHashem Elokechem. Banim atem laHashem Elokechem. Lo, what is it? Lo tisgodedu. Tisgodedu. Lo tasimu korcha bein einechem lamed. So this idea of making lacerations in the flesh or bald spots over a dead body, right? Does that apply only to men and women? Why not? This pasuk, there's nothing to limit this pasuk to men. Well, it could be banim. Anyway, so presumably this applies to men and women. Comes along Isi, and Isi says even the idea of karcha here only applies to men. Where does he get that from? Let's just read one sentence, and we'll pick up with this on Shabbos. It says. My time at the EC, Darish Hachi, Banimatem Lashem Lokechem, Lochis Kodu, Velotasim Korcha Ben Nechem Lameis. He Am Kadosh Ata Lashem Lokecha. And as Dove correctly anticipated, Banim Velo Banot Lekarcha. So the bald spot and presumably maybe also the lacerations of the flesh, presumably, are only for men, not for women. Okay. Now, but the Gemara says, would you apply that to the lacerations? Maybe the lacerations also women is only limiting it to men. No, you're a holy people. More. So I mean, holy people. All of you are a holy people. So I'm kadosh. So that means don't make lacerations. Something that is less of an affront to the body, less of a problem, which is only lekarcha. Okay, so umam re'ita l'rabot et hagedida. Why did you say women are included? Because of am kadosh in the prohibition of laceration. ulahotzi et karcha, but they're excluded from the bald spot because it's panim v'lo banot. Marbani et gedida sheyeshem b'makom hasar v'lo b'makom hasar, because gedida is a broader scope. Gedida applies to any part of the body where there's hair, where there's no hair, any lacerations. Motzias and karcha she'ein ela b'makom hasar. Okay, so let's say, but as opposed to karcha, that's a more limited prohibition. That's what will exclude women. So you have banim, and then you have ki am kadosh. You could also say, by the way, okay, am kadosh is linked most immediately. No, actually, it doesn't work. Anyway, so banim, we're going to say women are excluded and included. They're excluded from the more limited prohibition of karcha, and they're included from the broader prohibition of lacerations in the flesh. Okay, and we'll pick up on Shabbos with this position of Isi Ben Yehuda.
Rabbi Linzer, is Shabbat Hagadol drasha? Do we need to adjust the time?